discussion there. But I guess what was interesting to me was when Steve talked about how the Department of Family and Children and Families was opposed to this, he thought, cynically, because equal placement means less collections for child support, which means less federal revenue to subsidize the system. So that was pretty interesting. And then he talked about the state bar. Of course, they would have less litigation, less guardian ad litem fees, I suppose. So this would be something that they would oppose as well. And this idea of rule by experts, that part resonated with me most when he said that the present system has this presumption to decision-making by so-called experts. And he said, nobody knows what's best for my children than I do. And I thought, wow, that's powerful when you say it that way. I think that's something we need to keep in mind. Ruth, I never, because I was so busy with technology, I never asked if you had anything for us today.
Got some on the paper. It's interesting how much the Koch brothers donate to politics versus what the unions do.
Okay.
It's in blue down there. Blue and red.
All right, I'll take a look at Christian's copy, unless you have an extra one. All right, we'll sail right on to our talk today, just because I got kind of a late start here. This whole idea of our corporations people. When you saw the title on the email, that's probably sounded vaguely familiar, and I want to show you a brief video clip as to why you probably thought that way. So let me get over here to our friend from the 2012 campaign.
That the promises we make in Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare are promises we can keep. And there are various ways of doing that. One is we can raise taxes on people. That's not the way. Corporations are people, my friend. We can raise taxes on. Of course they are. Everything corporations earn ultimately goes to people. So, where do you think it goes? Whose pockets? Whose pockets? People's pockets. Okay. Human beings, my friend. So number one, you can raise taxes. You can raise taxes. That's not the approach that I would take. Number two, you can make sure that the promises we make are promises that we can keep. And in my view, the areas that you have to consider are higher income people.
Well, that didn't work so well with the sound at the end, but you got the gist of it anyway. Looks like my sound card was kind of screwing up or something. Hopefully that's okay. So anyways, yes, that made the headlines and became kind of a symbol, I suppose, of this rich candidate's detachment from the needs of the common man or whatever. But the reason there was that hostility there is because this has been a major issue on the left ever since the Citizens United case, which I think was back in 2009, which again said that certain groups, certain organizations of people could spend unlimited money in spreading a message. And that seemed outrageous to the left, and they got very concerned about it. So in reaction, they've been mobilizing, and they would like some constitutional amendments, some of which would do away with the Supreme Court decisions culminating in Citizens United. And they also want to do away with the idea that money is a vital part of speech. If you spend money in order to spread a message, they want to say that's not protected by the First Amendment. So this is a pretty significant issue. It gains added urgency, I suppose, because of the drive for an Article 5 convention. And for people, some of the people on the right doing so for a balanced budget amendment, some people on the left organized around this idea of corporate personhood that I just mentioned. So to have someone talk to this issue for us, I've asked Tom Eddlem from the New American Magazine to come talk about it. Tom's been a contributing editor at the New American for many years, probably 12, 14 years. And his essays are also found on LouRockwell.com, and some of them have been adopted into the Opposing Viewpoints series by Greenhaven Press. I'm running out of air. And he currently teaches history and economics at a Boston area high school. So I'm going to try to transfer Tom over to the big screen here, and he can unmute himself. And then when I do that, you can give him a welcome. So let me see if I get you maximized, Tom. Okay, you are on the screen. If you want to say something, we'll make sure we're hearing you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm happy to be back at the Continental Summit Forum.
All right. I think you're okay. You see the crowd a little bit?
I do.
Okay. All right. Sorry for the rough introduction, but why don't we give Tom an applause welcome at least?
until you hear what I have to say before you applaud. Okay, today I'm going to talk to you about the move to amend the U.S. Constitution in order to ban corporate personhood, as they call it, and repeal the Supreme Court's 2009 Citizens United decision. Citizens United was a conservative nonprofit organization that began to run a video against Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign back in 2008. And the Federal Elections Commission claimed that it violated federal rules banning explicitly political messages from corporations going back to the 1907 Tillman Act. I think what I'm going to do is, since I'm really not that great a looking guy, and I'm getting up there in years, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip my screen so that you can see the sources that I'm using for the talk rather than me. I can't show both me and the sources, and I think documenting the sources as I go is more important than, you get to see my face. So I'm going to try that right now. But the Tillman Act, let's see, you should get it about now. The Tillman Act, so you should see my screen. It's a screen of the New American Magazine. Just somebody waves if you see it. It's
still working on it, Tom.
Okay. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through my sources, and I've got right now a Wikipedia page of Ben Tillman, who was a governor of South Carolina and a senator from South Carolina who authored the Tillman Act. And the Tillman Act banned political speech by corporations. There were some exceptions allowed, but they were very narrow. And it stood as law for over 100 years in violation of the First Amendment. But the interesting thing about it is Tillman himself was a militant racist. And he actually did it in part so that he could stop corporations from trying to undo the Jim Crow laws in the South. Private corporations had opposed segregations of separate but equal as a government regulation that was both inefficient and costly. In fact, the private railway company that involved in the Plessy versus Ferguson case that established separate but equal in 1896 had set up Homer Plessy as an example of a way to try to strike down Louisiana's separate but equal laws. So, in that sense, Tillman was a racist, and the idea behind stopping corporate speech was based on promoting and extending racism. Anyway, the 2009 Citizens United decision overturned the Tillman Act, basically, with regard to elections. And by a 5-4 decision, they said corporations have the same free speech rights as individuals. And news of that decision flew like a shockwave across the political left. And can you see my screen at this point?
No, Tom. I think you have to try resharing again, because it's just, it's churning away at it, but nothing shows.
Okay. All right. Try it one more time here.
There you go. We've got move to amend on the screen.
Okay, good. This is one of the larger organizations associated with promoting a repeal of the Citizens United decision. And I think what I'm going to do is before I get into it, I want to sketch out an outline of my talk. I've got a lot of material to pack into a short period of time here. Essentially, this is about Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, trying to install a backbone for themselves by constitutional amendment, in this case going through a constitutional convention. First, I'm going to address the merits of this amendment, and then I'm going to outline the tactics suggested by its proponents and how it will likely play out if it's not opposed with sufficient vigor. And let's begin with the view of those supporting the amendments. Okay, Citizens United, not Citizens United, the move to amend people have a pretty basic thing, the statement right here on their site. And what it says is, on January 21st, 2010. It was actually announced the previous month. With its ruling in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations are persons. Can you see this along with me?
Yes.
Okay. Entitled by the U.S. Constitution to buy elections and run our government. Human beings are people, corporations are legal fictions. We, the people of the United States of America, reject the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United and other related cases and move to amend our Constitution to firmly establish that money is not speech and that human beings, not corporations, are entitled to constitutional rights. Now, I can refute that argumentation with simple logic right now. Proponents have moved to amend.org and a host of other organizations similarly aligned adhere to the childlike assumption that freedom of the press never had anything to do with owning a press, a printing press, or that it never had anything to do with the money to buy the paper and ink to print the paper. It didn't. The rank and file signing on to their petitions also adhere to the childlike assumption that before Citizens United, corporations didn't have any political speech. Some did, but we called them media corporations. More on that a little bit later. And then finally, the rank and file signing on to this adhere to one more assumption, that once a person associates with another person, their rights under the Constitution evaporate. They shouldn't. And you make those rights of no use if that's how you hold it. But let me give you a little more historical background on these issues, especially because the leadership of this movement, which is very different from the rank and file, is using this childlike mentality of its followers to destroy both the First and Second Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Now, proponents of a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United claim a number of absurd things. Here's a story from Mike Gatto. He's a California state assemblyman, and he told California Newswire, let me see if I can find the exact quote here in the story. He told them that, okay, let's see, I doubt the founding fathers, where is it? Okay, this is it. I doubt the founding fathers had free speech of multinational corporations and foreign corporations in mind when they drafted the First Amendment. Okay, this is what he says. And this is the fear-mongering that goes on. Actually, that's not even close to being true. It was one of the first issues tackled by the early Congresses as the Congress debated the Sedition Act and fretted over the influence of French revolutionary government's propaganda on American elections. An issue were the first American political corporations called democratic societies, which were being organized in cities across the United States in opposition to the Federalist Party. Congress eventually passed the Sedition Act, which unconstitutionally banned criticism of the president, but the dreaded French influence never materialized, and there were never any prosecutions on that matter. The more things changed, the more they stayed the same with regard to unsupported, alarmist accusations about the foreign threat. From the Sedition Act, there were a dozen prosecutions of newspaper publishers on the basis of criticizing the President of the United States in print, including, and I use this worksheet with my students in the U.S. history class. We discuss the different arguments for and against the Sedition Act. And some of them, there's a couple of quotes here I want to use from Virginia congressmen. One of them is Thomas Claiborne of Virginia. And he says, he says, suppose that abusive paragraphs are published against the president. If they're calumnies, they'll have no weight, and if they're truth, they ought to be published. All right. This represents the advanced view of the founding fathers, that they recognize that it doesn't even really matter who's saying it. If they have merit, people will listen. If they don't have merit, people won't listen. Another one, John Nicholas. he also of Virginia, said that, let's see, falsehoods, where is it here? It's in here. I don't see it, but he said falsehoods issued from a press are not calculated to do any lasting mischief. Falsehoods will always depreciate the press from whence they originate. He believed that the publication of one falsehood does more to destroy a paper than the mischief and abuse of his enemies. All right, and that's what the founding fathers viewed. Now, of course, it did eventually pass, but the idea behind it was it was after a foreign threat that never materialized, but it ended up being used to destroy freedom of speech and freedom of the press. But what is this great threat we hear to democracy from the left today? They say, well, we have unlimited political speech, and there's all kinds of money going around. In fact, there was talk before I was listening in on your conversation during the introduction about how the Koch brothers have given so much money, and of course they were actually number 59 in the list of total spending in among political corporations. But if you look at, like, say, for example, Karl Rove. Karl Rove's group was American Crossroads, and you just go to the Sunlight Corporation, you can see all of the different races where he put millions of dollars into it. You can see here that he supported Mitt Romney, he opposed Barack Obama, he opposed Robert Kerry. If you look at among the $300 million that his two organizations threw into the race in 2012, every single one of those races where he spent more than $500,000, he lost, with the exception of this one right here, the Kansas Senate race. And Kansas, by the way, is the reddest of red states. Every single statewide elected official is a Republican. So it was sort of a shoe-in. But every other race where he poured more than $500,000 into it, he lost. All right? Let me give you one other example of where this, where basically the view of the founding fathers that a poor message is not going to resonate is also worse. A lot of people talk about this great Las Vegas casino owner, Sheldon Adelson, who spent tens of millions of dollars first promoting Newt Gingrich's presidential campaign as a Republican who lost, and then spent tens of millions more promoting Mitt Romney, who also lost. He's almost a metaphor for the example, for the proverb of a fool with his money are soon parted. In other words, the words of those two Virginia congressmen more than 2 centuries ago have proven true. Money does not overcome poor arguments or weak candidates. Well, the difference is what did work in 2012 is a liberty message. And that's what's new. The much smaller Liberty for All Super PAC won all but one of more than 10 races it financed in 2012. All right? They said they had a 90% success rate. They had a few $1 million raised by private donations and one wealthy guy. The Senate Conservatives Fund, the Club for Growth, had similar results with only a fraction of the money that Karl Rove raised. The battle isn't about money per se, nor even about corporations. The Citizens United campaign, or the Anti-Citizens United campaign, is about stopping freedom of speech. I'm old enough to remember, I actually have been contributing to the New American since 1987. I remember when we talked about freedom of the press, it was actually a press that you used to make the pamphlets, like our old trim bulletins. And that's what the left wanted to suppress. They took one of our trim committees to court saying it violated Federal Election Commission rules about electioneering because they were phony voter guides. And of course, this was what the original McCain-Feingold bill was, which was passed by Congress, was meant to suppress. And it's what Citizens United overturned. The drive to end corporate personhood is actually a new sedition act, like from 1798. The move to amend is squarely directed at the new press and solely intended to suppress writings and speech of a political nature. Now you may ask, well, why? Here's a perfect example of why. Let's see if I get it here. Okay. The New York Times, right after, okay, this isn't the one I want, I got one other. All right, here's the New York Times. Right after the decision came out, the New York Times had a big editorial about, which was a political editorial, about how bad it was. And they actually take in the editorial, they quote John, nope, that's not the one I want here. Maybe I do want the other one, but they came out against it. And in a previous editorial, they actually quote the one of our early Supreme Court justices, John Marshall. And this is kind of an example of the deceit that's involved in this. All right, if you look at the quote here, John Marshall, the nation's greatest Chief Justice, saw corporation as an artificial being, invisible and tangible, he wrote in 1819. Being a mere creature of law, it possesses only those properties which its charter of its creation confers upon it, either expressly or as incidental to its very existence. And of course, the implication of that is exactly the opposite of what you were supposed to hear from Mitt Romney, and the left likes to ridicule it as these artificial creatures of law. But there's a lot to unpack in those two very deceptive sentences. First of all, John Marshall wasn't talking about corporations in general. He was talking about one particular corporation, the Second Bank of the United States. The case he was deciding was McCullough versus Maryland, which involved an actual corporation chartered specifically by Congress. All right, it's more than a little deceptive to impute to Marshall that the national bank, created by act of Congress and granted a special monopoly, is analogous to all private corporations, both for-profit and non-profit. Of course, the reality is quite opposite to what the New York Times implies. Corporations are not creatures of the law. They are people freely associating, which the law acknowledges after they already exist. Churches are corporations. Colleges are corporations. Charitable organizations are corporations. And likewise. All of these existed before any state or federal government offered its imprimatur over them. Like with businesses, same thing. Businesses were not created by the state any more than the above-mentioned non-profit corporations. And again, I want to stress, Citizens United was a non-profit corporation. All of the press also is comprised of corporations. The New York Times and all newspapers are corporations. So are all television stations and radio stations. Most internet websites are corporations. And again, the government doesn't create them. Citizens simply associate themselves together as they've done for centuries, millennia, using their natural rights of freedom of association, and it's a right implied in the First Amendment. Indeed, during the debate over the First Amendment in Congress, Massachusetts Congressman Theodore Sedgwick objected to adding freedom of assembly to the First Amendment because he thought it was getting too much into detail. He basically said, well, if you look here, it'll say, what, said he, shall we secure the freedom of speech and think it necessary at the same time to allow the right of assembling? If people freely converse together, they must assemble for that purpose. It is a self-evident, inalienable right which the people possess. All right? That's the point of it. It's irrelevant to say you have the freedom of speech and you can't get together to do it. It's irrelevant to say you have freedom of the press, but you can't own a press. It's irrelevant to say you have the right to speak your mind, but you can't buy a television ad to do that. That was Sedgwick's point. And of course, this is what the left is trying to do, to limit it down. Essentially, the Move to Amend group is telling us that the NAACP, which is a corporation, all right? They have no right to speak. You know, here's an organization that was founded in the wake of slavery, in the depths of Jim Crow, and the left is saying, you have no right to speak. The reality is the opposite. Political corporations have all the rights of their members and their contributors through the right of freedom of association. All right? This is the NAACP or the NRA or any other group should not be told by the federal government how much they can speak and under what circumstances. This is an unenumerated right, but it is a right to associate with like-minded citizens and pool their funds, and it goes hand in hand with the freedom of speech and press. And by the way, this isn't something that's new. It's not something that's different. This is from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America back in the 1830s. And one of the things that let's see. One of the things that de Tocqueville notes is that the right to freedom of association and the right to form organizations in his day was more powerful than the rights than the press. The right of associating in this fashion almost merges with the freedom of the press, but societies thus formed possess more authority than the press. So this is not new. All right, more authority. And right. Let me take I think I've beaten this issue to death, but let me go on and say the origin of corporations is a side issue. The real issue here, I think, is the hypocrisy. Let's go back to the New York Times editorial. Remember, they said this was a terrible blow to democracy, the New York Times said. Well, you know, they said that corporations shouldn't have any voice. They shouldn't be able to speak politically. Well, why do they say that? Well, because it would upset their monopoly. 2 weeks before, or 3 weeks before that, the New York Times, which owns the Boston Globe, endorsed in an editorial the Democrat to replace Ted Kennedy, who died in the United States Senate from Massachusetts. No corporate right to freedom of speech? Well, except for themselves. And that's really where this is at. That's really what this is about. Because if you look at who has the political speech or who had it before Citizens United, you basically have a small number of corporations that manage almost all of the media in America. If you look at these 6 corporations, and by the way, this week there was over the weekend there was news that Comcast and Warner Brothers would merge. Now Comcast is a 51% owner of NBC. Over, if you look on the left side here, with General Electric, Comcast owns most of NBC, Universal Pictures, et cetera, et cetera. So these 5 corporations would now be 4. These 6 corporations would now be 5. Who controls these corporations? What is their political outlook? Well, it's pretty easy to see because you can go to, first of all, one of the things, when we talk about money in elections, with the left frets about the millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars spent by Karl Rove inefficiently. But if you look at the Walt Disney Company, it has not just hundreds of millions of dollars, but billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars. All right, between these 6 corporations, I'm not going to find the right thing here, but between these 6 corporations, you're talking about 245, not million, but $1 billion, 1,000 times more than what Karl Rove spent. All right, and as a result, you look at, well, what is their political viewpoint? Are they pushing Rockford conservative views? No. If you look at the contributions, the number 1 contributors are recipients of employees of the Walt Disney Company, of Time Warner, of all of these companies. You look here, the individual contributors, which is most of the corporations, is almost all Democrats. All right, this is Time Warner here. All right, But if even the same thing is, you can see the same thing for the Walt Disney Corporation. Who did they give to in 2012? Well, the individuals who are running Walt Disney, who are in the things, it's even more biased toward the Democrats. These are the guys getting their viewpoints. These are the guys who are getting their political views out. Now, some people might say, yeah, but we've got Fox. Fox is on America's side, on the conservative side. News Corporation, which owns Fox, actually skews Democratic as well by donations. If you look here, the number one donor, DNC Services Corporation, the Democratic National Committee, Democratic National Congressional Campaign Committee, Barack Obama. You look at that, it's 3-1 in favor of Democrats. That's the most Republican network. The left, in short, is afraid their media monopoly is fading away with the advent of the internet and the Citizens United decision. And that's why Harvard professor Lawrence Lessig was a founding member of the Citizens, Move to Amend organization, and he's promoted it with all he can. He's trotted out the boogeyman, by the way, of, there's these, if you look at, let's see, where are we here? He's got a boogeyman's story about how let's see, I don't see my link, but, about how there's hundreds of millions, here we go. Super PACs are giving hundreds of millions of dollars to Republicans, but if you look at the real numbers, the left is spending hundreds of billions of dollars promoting their viewpoint. Admittedly, not all of it is strictly political, but they are, you can definitely tell, whether it is the endless coverage of, when we talk about the Olympics, everything is about, Russia's laws on homosexuality, or, the latest football player to come out as homosexual. I mean, there's, you almost can't get away with, their story choice. Again, I'm not saying, anybody should be beating up on anybody, but you can see that there is a clear agenda there. And the political donations go with that as well. All right, so this is what we have to stop with. These 6 corporations that control more than $200 billion every year, they want to restore their monopoly. They want to be the only ones to be able to say anything. And it just goes back to Albert Gallatin, who was a congressman from Pennsylvania. He spoke against the Sedition Act, and one of the things he said was that, let's see if I can find it here. I can't find it, but he said in his speech against the Sedition Act, the proper weapon to combat error is truth, and a resort to coercion and punishments in order to suppress writings. Attacking their measures was to confess that these could not be defended by other means. He said the true object of the sedition law is to enable one party to oppress the other, that they have the means and the power to punish printers who may publish against them. And whilst their opponents will remain alone without redress, exposed to the abuse of ministerial prints. And that is what they want. The Citizens United hasn't really increased the ability of the rich to engage in unlimited political speech. They've always been able to do it as individuals. They've always been able to buy ads. They've always been able to buy a television station, a radio station, a newspaper. They do it all the time. We saw that with the purchase of the Washington Post a couple of months ago. The move to repeal Citizens United is about, it won't affect in the slightest, the ability of millionaires and billionaires to spend their own money for political speech. What this amendment is about is stopping this new venue for poor middle classes to pool their money into a common fund to compete with the rich and multi-billion-dollar media corporations. That's what it's aimed at. It's aimed at repealing the First Amendment. So how do they do it? Well, the left has a plan. They want to use Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution to do just that. All right, if you look at their agenda, every part of it is go to a constitutional convention, and move to amend. If you just go even to their main webpage, they're looking for someone who is let me see. Oh, we want an outreach and media coordinator. Well, who's that? What are they doing? Oh, well, you need someone to, let me see. Article, I know I saw it in here, but one of the things is to coordinate Article 5 efforts. All right, these guys are pushing the Constitutional Convention. And in the end, they want to use the convention to promote the abolition of the First Amendment. This has been done locally. Their last session in 2011, there was Joint Assembly Joint Resolution 121 in Wisconsin. It hasn't been reintroduced yet this year, but it probably will be, and it was to do just that, to go to a constitutional convention and abolish the First Amendment. And it's not just the First Amendment the left is after. They want the Second Amendment as well. A couple of months ago, a law professor in Connecticut, at the University of Connecticut, came up with the idea that they should use the Constitutional Convention to repeal the Second Amendment as well. And this is not really a new movement. It's taken on much greater prominence because just in the last couple of weeks, Nancy Pelosi signed on to it, the Democratic leader in Congress, and wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post. I'll have a story in the New American about that later today or tomorrow. So, and it goes back really to 2011. One of the things that I attended a conference at Harvard University where Lawrence Lessig wanted to promote the idea that they should go to a constitutional convention to get this done. And some Tea Party people were there, including the Tea Party patriots, co-founder Mark Meckler, who has now since come out for a constitutional convention. He says he doesn't want it for this reason. He wants it for the reason of the balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution. But once you get to a convention, that you very well may open up the can of worms and get something like this passed. And I know that may be controversial in this area, so I just want to sketch out, I know I have very little time, I just want to sketch out how I think this could happen, how we could go to a constitutional convention, either under the Move to Amend movement or to go under a balanced budget amendment and then have it take off onto another tack, because a lot of the people promoting a balanced budget amendment through the Article 5 of the Constitution, the Constitutional Convention, say once you get enough states to say it should only be this one issue, you can't move it from that issue. It's based on bad history, unfortunately, and it's also based on bad politics. Let me just start with this. First way I see it is, and really the best example of, I think the best, safest example of the effort to go to a constitutional convention for a balanced budget amendment is this Compact for America being promoted by Nick Dranius of the Goldwater Institute and a few others. The idea behind it is this: they have a specific amendment that they want to adopt, unlike the American Legislative Exchange Commission, which has promoted the Constitutional Convention, a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution for decades, but not had anything really, any draft text to promote. These guys have a specific amendment that they want, and they create what they call a compact that basically would lock out the other states. And they also create the idea of the compact that they talk about here, they call it the Compact for America, would require 3/4 of the states to sign on to it before they go to a constitutional convention. Now, Article 5 says you can have a convention after 2/3 of the states sign on to, ask for a convention. Congress should call it after 2/3. But these guys say it doesn't count unless you have 3/4. That's actually an innovation and possibly a safeguard. They also have oaths for delegates that are would basically invalidate the delegates if they try to get off the convention. There's a number of specifics in the provisions of this compact that I think are, at least on paper, perfect. I mean, you look at it and you say, there's no way this can this could be overcome if we get to 3/4 of states. The problem with it, though, is the compact itself, or the amendment itself, is not just a balanced budget amendment, it's a tax limitation amendment. And the text of the amendment, if I can find it here, conventions, they've got every detail put together here, not only balances the budget, but okay, maybe the draft isn't here, this is just the compact. It limits how the budget would be balanced, and basically what it would do is it would guarantee cuts in programs, which I think is a good thing, but it also means that with the makeup of state legislatures nationwide, if you look at the makeup of state legislatures from in every state, you're not going to get the Democrats. And there are right now 27 states that are Republican, 5 that are mixed, and 18 that are Democratic. So you get to a constitutional convention, ordinarily with the 2/3, you need 34 states, and with the compact, they need 38. They've basically set up a Sisyphean task here because the Democratic states will never go for this. So they will never get their 38. They'll never even get the 34. It just won't happen. I mean, Sisyphus had better odds of pushing the rock up the hill and over the hill than this. But let's sketch out how we might get to a constitutional convention. And here's my fear: that Congress calls what I call an early convention. That what they do is they say, look, we've got some calls from the American Legislative Exchange Commission. They've got their own way of calling for a constitutional convention, and some states have gone with their view, and they've passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention. And then we've got some with the Compact for America, and they've got their version of how we should go to a constitutional convention, and also the left pushing for restore, as they call it, restore democracy. They've got their calls. Congress may just say, that's enough together. Now, legally, that wouldn't work. I mean, legally, under the compact theory, none of the states' requests for a convention are triggered. But Congress could just say, look, we want to get rid of the First Amendment and we want to get rid of this. Let's call it anyway. I mean, it would be unconstitutional, but as you guys know, most of you guys know, Congress doesn't always act constitutionally. So they could call this. And then what you would have is you'd have a convention where some people are bound by this compact, some people are not bound by the compact and are looking for a balanced budget amendment, and others would go there bound by the move to amends or Wolfpack plan to abolish the First Amendment. And then you'd have other states that would be there, because it would call all 50 states who don't have any agenda at all. And then what you have is this, this scenario. The interesting thing is the compact for America requires the delegates only to debate, only to consider the one amendment, their particular amendment on the balanced budget tax limitation amendment. If that's not done, they have to sign out and leave. What would happen if they don't have their 2/3 majority, if they don't have sufficient numbers? Would they just up and leave? The most conservative delegates from the most Republican states, would they just up and leave this ongoing constitutional convention to the liberals? That would be almost a nightmare scenario. I mean, I shudder to think what delegates from Massachusetts, California, and New York would do to our Constitution without other states to restrain them. It's also easy to see how many of these delegates, even if they're in the compact or otherwise pledged to only vote for a constitutional amendment to balance the budget, might jump ship. I think this is guaranteed to happen. If you look at the compact pledges that this will not happen because the rules are such that the delegates are, the phrase they use is all actions taken by any delegate in violation of this section are void ab initio. In other words, if the delegate is taken out from the beginning, he was legally never part of the, let me see if I can get the text here. Yeah, okay, here it is. All actions taken by are void ab initio. That's how the compact works. But the problem is the history is not on the side of this compact. Yes, under state law, from the state they're sent, they would not be legally delegates. But the Continental Congress, which was kind of a ruling constitutional convention from 1774 to 1781, saw a lot of independence from delegates who didn't follow their state's instructions. Joseph Hughes of North Carolina, when he was given instructions under the Halifax Resolves to support independence, opposed it anyway. A lot of other delegates supported independence, even though they were instructed not to support independence. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 went far beyond the expectations of what Congress had called for when they called the Constitutional Convention. And it doesn't necessarily even mean that the delegates would be outwardly rebellious against their oaths to only support this one amendment. On July 2nd, 1776, New York's delegates were under the instructions not to support independence. And Congress wanted a unanimous vote, so they simply abstained from voting. And the vote for independence was 12-0, not 13-0. And that's how it went through. So the delegates can and have shown independence historically. And the problem is, if they are independent, the state legislatures will have a tough time enforcing it. I mean, occasionally the Continental Congress did recall delegates, but this requires the state legislature, one, to be in session, and two, to be united enough to recall the delegates, which will probably not be the case, considering the dominance of the left of our mass media. Another possibility is what I call a late convention. This is sort of the inverse of the early convention scenario. Let's say that this compact somehow gets 38 states. Even the Democrats somehow are dumb enough to go along with it, and it goes to a call. And the Congress, as we know, doesn't want to balance the budget. How do they get to it? Well, they have to call a convention, but they say, we'll hold the convention, but after the next election. We'll hold it a year from now. And they set the press upon getting people to withdraw from the compact. Now, according to the compact, all right, you can't withdraw from the compact after it says here, whenever 3/4, nobody can, are members, 3/4 of the states are members, no state can withdraw. So you can't withdraw. But the reality is the states are going to withdraw. A state that can enter the compact has the ability legally to withdraw. The states are sovereign in that sense, and they will not only do it, but they will cause all kinds of ruckus. So that's how I see it. Now, the last line of defense of those seeking constitutional convention, and I know I'm running out of time here, is there's a powerful check on a runaway convention. Any changes at the convention require the approval of 3/4 of the state legislatures. All you have to do is go to the U.S. Constitution, Article 7 of the U.S. Constitution, Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution say, hey, it's got to be approved by 3/4 of the states. Well, it's not exactly necessarily true. If you go back to 1787, the law under the Articles of Confederation, Article 13 of the Articles of Confederation, had a rule about how our first Constitution can be amended. And it says, there it is, no alteration, no change to the Constitution can be made unless the state legislature of every state, all 13 states, agrees to it. Well, the founding fathers in 1770, what do we have, 2 minutes? I'm sorry, did you say something, David?
No, I did not. There was just a pause there, but go ahead and wrap it up.
Okay. One of my fears is that, the history is that the founding fathers didn't think they could get 13 states. In fact, they didn't for a number of years. Rhode Island didn't ratify the convention until 1790. After the Articles of Confederation Congress had already wrapped up, they'd had a presidential election. George Washington was elected. They elected a first Congress. They passed the Bill of Rights. They passed the first Tariff Act. They passed the Judiciary Act of 1789. And Rhode Island was an independent state. For a couple of years, they were an independent nation. The Congress didn't think they could get them, so they changed the rules from the Articles of Confederation. They said, the convention said 3/4 is good enough. And we still don't think we're going to get the 3/4. So not just the state legislature, but the state ratifying conventions are good enough. And then they got it. The next convention could do the same. A constitutional convention has the power to change the rules of ratification and has used that power in the past. And that would be my fear. We live in the age of democracy, and I think that they would require a national democratic vote on the new Constitution. I don't see why they wouldn't do that. There's more I want to say, but I think this is my fear, that we go to a convention and either it's directly because of the move to amend or under another cause, and it gets out of hand, and it's the method of ratification is taken away from us. I have other alternatives that I'd like to propose, but I know I don't have the time to do so. So I'm just going to wrap up right now. And if there's time for questions, or if you want to stay for questions, I'm happy to do so.
All right, Tom, why don't we switch you over to, or can you switch yourself over to
Yes.
cease sharing the screen, then we'll see you. All right, you're back. All right, thank you very much for that. I don't know, do we have like one or two questions that we could get in there quick? I know we're kind of running out of time, but Steve, let me see if I can turn the thing here. All right, well, it's not staying over there very well. Okay, go ahead, Steve. I see you waving your hand. Maybe if you come up closer, actually the microphone's right here.
I can hear pretty well.
Oh, can you?
Tom, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you. I appreciate you presenting today. One of the things I've been concerned about is that states that are moving toward a balanced budget amendment process have strong empowering legislation that does limit their delegates. And I know you mentioned that state law can bind delegates, but then you saw historically, you mentioned that the Convention of 1787 saw delegates go beyond the authority that was granted to them. I recently went back and reread all of the empowering legislation from the 12 states that sent delegates to that convention. And what I see when I read that history is only New York and Massachusetts limiting their delegates to only amending the articles, and I see 10 of the states giving their delegates free rein to take the action they took. And it looks to me like historically we don't see anybody in contemporary any contemporaries at that time seeing those delegates as running away or going beyond their call from their states. So, and we see 53 of the 55 signers of the that proposed the Constitution at that convention all came from those 10 states that gave them the free rein to do that. And I wonder if you could just comment on whether perhaps the idea that those delegates ran away from the authority they've been given is perhaps blown out of proportion. Thank you.
I think there's a little bit of truth to that, in that, many of them, the idea was to among most states was to rewrite the system of government. But my point was simply that delegates will be independent and have been independent. You said 50 out of 53. That's not, some of them disregarded their instructions, just as they did in the Continental Congress with regard to independence. Some violated their instructions promoting independence. Some violated their instructions against independence. And that's the wild card when you get, because the only way I see you getting to a constitutional convention politically, because of the relatively even divide between Democratic and Republican states, is a polyglot of resolutions. You're not going to get the three-quarters, the 38 states who are members of the compact. It's, like I said, it's a Sisyphean hill that they'll never climb. So the only way to get there is it's a coalition of different resolutions with different instructions. And, then what you'll see is, as they did in the Founding Fathers era, they pretty much did what they wanted. And I think you're going to see that. I also think that where the Founding Fathers were more likely to, I think they were more likely to be men of principle. I mean, I don't know who you guys would send from Wisconsin. I know you have a Republican legislature. Try to think about, who would you send? Would you send someone with a backbone, or would you send someone who would kind of go along to get along? Who's in the leadership of the state legislature? Maybe you have a good guy, but I think in general, the go along to get along guys are the guys appointed by state legislatures in today's world, and I think that that's what you're going to see. And you're not going to have those 38 solid compact states. So you're going to have a problem when you get to the convention.
I'm going to ask, I hope it's a quick question because I'm really running late. I read somewhere recently about a couple delegates that did leave the Constitutional Convention, and they went back to their state and they warned this thing's running away. And there was only a few of them, but there were a few. And I'm trying to remember. Do you know who they were?
I don't recall.
Of course, you had Alexander Hamilton ran away because he didn't get his monarchy either. So you had a mixed bag there. But anyways, I think we're going to have to stop at that because this is way longer than we're supposed to go. I really appreciate your effort, Tom, in pulling this all together. And there was a lot of information. I tried recording it, but I got to get a new computer. I saw my sound card was doing funny things, so I stopped recording and I turned on my little side recorder. But I'm afraid we missed a lot of the introductory stuff. So unless, okay, never mind. David Lewis has a recorder on the front table, so we'll have the audio of this anyway. So anyways, I appreciate it, and we'll give a little round of applause here for Tom, and we'll move you off screen. All right, I'm going to try to get you off screen here so that you're got a little more privacy than you did, and we'll hang her up, and I'll touch base with you later.
Sounds good.
Thank you. All right, he's out of there. All right, for some more information on the whole corporations and free speech issue, we've got a couple of, about 15 copies of the article that Tom wrote about a year and a half ago, Our Corporations Entitled to Free Speech. Some of the Founding Father quotes and Alex de Tocqueville quotes. I said that wrong, but you know what I mean. I can't speak French. Those quotes are in that article, and they're on the back table. There's also a recent issue back there that I think you'll be interested in checking out, where there's a sidebar article where Tom points out that these Democrats who are so worried about corporations and they're ruining the country and everything, he points out how they support it with their votes. And he points to their opposition to auditing the Federal Reserve and a few other examples of that type. Oh, that's the issue. Yeah, okay. Well, you have a few of those as well. I'm sorry. All right. I called David Lewis up at the last minute and asked him if he could bring some over. This is the magazine that's got the article about corporations in it and free speech. And this is the other one that's got the most recent article about the war on the Tea Party with the sidebar article I just mentioned. So I think you'll find those of interest. We got to get a couple announcements out. If any of you got to run back to work or something, feel free. I'm not offended. We are running late. But if you are able to stay, we'll get through some of our announcements quick. Ed, you had something about Leah Volkmer's bill regarding Common Core and all this?
I'll try to make it quick. Today, of course, is the referendum day. Those of you in Appleton, would certainly encourage you to vote no on that, without going into length on that. But I'd also like to point out, if you've heard the ad that we ran over this weekend and yesterday and today, I'd like to hear any comments on that. That was an ad opposing the referendum. This Thursday, an important hearing in Senator Olson's Education Committee dealing with Common Core. He is being forced to have a hearing on Senator Boutmer's new bill that she made known today at about 11 o'clock. So this is moving fast. Anybody who can make that, please see me. I may try to make that drive down. In regard to that, I highly suggest you call your state senator and your state assembly rep soon, within the 24 to 48 hours before, you can before that hearing. Let them hear your support. I know you don't know the particulars. I'll tell you very briefly what they are. This bill would basically be a new bill to create education standards in Wisconsin, not tied to Common Core. So the whole left, they couldn't repeal it. She made this clear in the radio broadcast. They were convinced a lawsuit would be brought under the statutory authority given to EPI Tony Evers, who has alluded he would sue. And rather than risk the lawsuit, they're coming with this new bill to give enhanced control to a new board that will have oversight over the DPI on this curriculum issue. It's a whole different approach they're taking. The governor, she said, is supportive of it, very critical. And what else, if anything? The only other thing I'm going to throw out, today Senator Johnson at the Appleton Public Library, 5 to 6:30. If you can make that, I encourage you to be there. We need to have a discussion from ourselves to our senator on various issues there. Thank you.
Tonight at the Appleton Public Library, did you say?
I've got it up on the screen if you want to catch the details there.
Okay, thank you, David.
Let's see, Mr. Dixon, you had a booklet